Hi, my name's John Tennell. I just went to Israel with my church for 10 days, and I didn't know what to expect. And maybe some of you guys are thinking about going to Israel as well. So I just want to kind of share with you the 10 days that I spent there and how moving it was for me. So first of all, I thought it was pretty neat that when we flew over there, we went from Texas up to Toronto, and then we went over the North Pole and kind of over Iceland, Norway, whatever, and then landed in Tel Aviv. So I thought that was kind of interesting to note. We landed in Tel Aviv, and by that point we were all, pretty exhausted from traveling so much. And we spent the night, as you can see on the picture here, on the Mediterranean Sea in a little town called Netanya. So it was really beautiful. And there were, obviously, there was the Mediterranean Sea, so that was beautiful. There was some cool architecture here, and waterfalls and whatnot. So then they told us that in Israel, dogs are pets, but cats eat rats. And so they let cats just run free in the streets, and they do, and I guess they control the rat population. I don't really know, that's just what I was told, but I saw a lot of cats. I found this guy, and he painted my picture for 170 shekels, which is about $35 or so. It's basically $1 equals 3.5 shekels. That's kind of the easy way to do the math. I think it fluctuates a little bit. Anyway, here he is kind of straightening it out, and then that is the picture that he painted of me, which I thought was a pretty good deal. So on day 2, we went to Caesarea first thing in the morning, and that was where one of Herod's palaces was. That's Herod the Great. Apparently there were many Herods that I was unaware of. Here's some sculpture that's left over after it's been beat up. I don't know why all the heads have to fall off these statues, but apparently that happens. Here's our guide, Stan, right here in the hat. He was from South Africa, and Stan was an amazing guide, just absolutely amazing. So this is the amphitheater. This held about 4,000 people. It would have had a wall that went up behind where the stage was that really kind of held the sound in there and echoed it off so that everybody could hear well. It was pretty amazing, the acoustics on the place. And this would be where they had theatrical performances and things like that. This group of people down here, kind of in the middle, they were from Singapore, and they were taking pictures and stuff. And then in English, they just started singing "How Great Thou Art," and it was a little bit distracting because it was so loud. And finally, our guide, who was trying to talk to us about the place, goes, "Why don't you guys just sing along? You all know the words." And so then our group started singing, and then everybody that was in the amphitheater started singing, and you could tell they were all from different countries all over the world, and yet they all sang "How Great Thou Art," and everything just kind of hushed in awe as this song was sang, and it was really a beautiful moment. And then everybody finished, and there was kind of a moment of silence, and then he went on guiding. But I did think that that was pretty special thing. So this is where Herod's palace would have been, and it was a pretty large palace. This marble stuff, the capstones and the pillars and things like that, were all carved out of marble by hand, which is amazing to me. And that it's lasted, this particular stuff is over 2,000 years old, which is pretty impressive. Here's our guide, Stan again, Stan Goodenough. Pretty much amazing guide. If you have the opportunity, have him guide you. He knows stuff and has a real passion for what he does. Anyway, this piece of stone they found in Herod's palace, and it says Pontius Pilate name on it. And so Pontius Pilate was definitely there at some point, probably exactly when the Bible says he was there. Okay, so this kind of rectangular shape here, this was part of Herod's palace, and he had it over the sea, and fresh water, I guess, floats on top of salt water. So he had fresh water piped in that rested on top of this salt water, and he had a freshwater pool in his palace that was pretty Olympic size from what I can tell. And then he would have, big parties and things like that. Well, apparently Herod was kind of a monster, and so he would invite all these people over and say, enjoy the party, whatever. And then at some point during the evening, when the festivities were getting, boring, I guess, he would kind of give the nod, and some of his people would come and just drown somebody right there in this pool. And then everybody would watch, and then once the person was finally dead, then they would all applaud and move on with their evening. Pretty horrible. I can't imagine being invited to one of Herod's parties, and then, oops, it ended bad. Nevertheless, it was beautiful. Here's the water, the Mediterranean Sea, and here's the Mediterranean Sea again. This was the Hippodrome, which was like a arena for blood sport. And this is looking out onto the sea, so it would have been right there. Well, I mean, it still is right there on the ocean. But then people would have been having chariot races and gladiator battles, and a lot of Christians were killed here. Paul would have stood when he gave his defense against King Agrippa and some of the other officials back then, saying, look, this is, in Acts it talks about it, this is my testimony, this is what I did, and Jesus is real. And then King Agrippa said, Paul, you're pretty convincing, you almost convinced me to become a Christian. So that's pretty much exactly where Paul stood. And then obviously right above that would have been where all the officials would have sat. So on day 3, we went to Morocco, also known as Mount Carmel, also known as the place where Elijah called fire down from heaven, and then killed 400 prophets of Baal. Here's looking down. They've since built a church. The Catholic Church has pretty much built some type of a church everywhere that they have any kind of sacred place, I guess. So here's a statue of Elijah killing some of the 400 prophets of Baal. Then this is in the North District, which is just, I don't know which city this is, to be honest with you. I took a whole lot of pictures and I was there for a while. They have fish farms there. So these big rectangular lake-looking things are fish farms. And they, I suppose, raise fish and then farm them. Here's another city in the valley. Then we went to Nazareth. From there, Nazareth, of course, is where Jesus spent a portion of his childhood. This is an olive tree in Nazareth, and it's about 420 years old. So these people don't actually dress like this all the time. They go home to regular houses, but this would have been a shepherd in Jesus' day, and he had his sheep in this little pen here. They're his sheep. Here's a tomb that's carved out of rock, so obviously only rich people would have had a tomb like that, and then the stone would have been rolled in its place. Here they are harvesting olives, which is pretty cool. I guess they put this burlap stuff down underneath, and then they shake the tree, and then all the olives fall down there and the leaves and whatnot, and then they gather those and take them away. So I asked them, I said, hey, can I see one of those olives? And they threw one to me, and I didn't know what I was doing, and I started to bite into it, and I was like, can I eat them? And they're like, no, don't eat them. It's very bitter. So don't eat them when they're off the tree, I guess. All right, so this is a wine press, and I guess the seeds in the grapes, if you crush them, they taste bad. So that's why you can't use like a olive press, but you just squish it with your feet. So they put, where the guy's standing, they put a bunch of grapes, and then everybody gets in there barefoot, you hope clean barefoot, and they squish all the grapes, and then it runs down where this groove is into the big basin, and then they collect the grape juice and then take it off to be, processed or whatever. So then this is also in Nazareth, and this is actually Nazareth village. Okay, so then this is an olive press. They put the olives in here, the donkey walks around, and there's a big stone wheel that's attached to that. And that stone wheel crushes all the olives and then makes this mash looking stuff. Then they take that and they put it in the olive press. I'll explain that later. This is a carpenter shop, like Joseph and Jesus probably had growing up, and apparently carpenter doesn't just mean woodworker, it means any kind of builder. So they would have also worked with stone, since obviously there's so much stonework there. They took the wool from the sheep, and then this lady is spinning the wool, not in this particular picture, but she's holding some of the yarn that she spun. And then they showed us different things they used to color the fabric into different colors, and how they did that. It was pretty interesting. Okay, so then the next day, day 4 for us, we stayed in a kibbutz, and a kibbutz is like a commune kind of for Jewish people. They farm and they do all kinds of things together as a commune. But it was really beautiful. So here's some flowers that I saw in the morning. Here's some more flowers. There's a lot of rosemary and stuff like that sitting around. And then, of course, we had breakfast. And the food was just amazing. I think you would really love it a lot. Then we went from there straight to the Sea of Galilee. So we rode on a boat just like this and kind of went around. This would have been where Jesus walked on the water, somewhere around here in a storm. And then I just thought this was cool with the American flag and the Israeli flag together, united. This is looking out from the Sea of Galilee. So the Sea of Galilee is 700 feet below sea level, and it's fresh water, not salt water, which I did not know. And also it provides most of the water for all of Israel, or a good portion of Israel, which is, I think, very interesting. There was so much to see that pretty much anywhere you threw a rock, you'd be like, and then this Bible story happened here, and this one happened here, and so on and so forth. So it's difficult for me to remember everything, but it was really a rich experience. This is once we landed on the other side of the Sea of Galilee, and they had this kind of area that I just thought was gorgeous. These flowers were everywhere. If you look real close, there is, I'll try to highlight it in the video. This is an Egyptian mongoose. I saw several of these just going around. They look kind of like a cat and a weasel had a baby together, kind of a little bit of a pointed face, but they weren't aggressive or anything like that, and they just were rolling around off in the field and playing with each other. I just didn't get good pictures of them. Okay, so then we went to the ancient city of Dan, and this was obviously, some of this is more recent that they've updated it, but it's still pretty cool. Then we went down this path, and there's kind of some more of the city. Keep in mind, this city is 4,000 years old, so it just looks like some rocks heaped on top of each other, but at the time was kind of a big deal. This river flowed down towards the Jordan River, so this would be, I guess, some kind of tributary of the Jordan River. This is a fig tree. There were fig trees everywhere, and I have a real love for fig trees. Not just because figs are delicious, but also because of what they mean to me. I wrote a song about it, and you can look at my website and check that out. Try not to make this too long. So here is close to the city gates of the city of Dan, and this is kind of looking from the other direction. This would have been where they did a lot of their official kind of things. They would have had Boaz and Ruth were in this area, and Boaz probably would have redeemed her and bought her land and then married her right there in those city gates. And then several other, just anything important that was kind of official would have happened there as well. So inside the same city perimeter, this is the Gates of Abraham. And I should know what city this is technically, but it's kind of all like literally right around the corner from the city of Dan. And there is no doubt that Abraham walked through these gates 4,000 years ago. The awning on top of it is because they have been excavating this and they're trying to uncover it, but a lot of it's kind of softer stone and they don't want it to erode away, so they've got that covering on top of it. Here's a picture of what it would have looked like. On the bottom part, that's kind of like the city wall that was all the way around, and then inside would have been the city. And then as you look up here, then that's looking up those steps and into that door, that's where Abraham would have walked. And then here you can see that they had like triple fortification. You had to go through several different doors to get through, and then the walls were very big and wide on top so they could defend themselves. From there we went to a place that's called the Gates of Hell, and this is where, it's a literal place called the Gates of Hell. That cave right there is where the Gates of Hell were. It used to flow with water out of the mouth of that thing, and they would sacrifice their children. Pretty much, I guess, every satanic cult kind of came from this place at some point or other. And then this was a place where they worshipped Pan, who was the god of goats, among other things, which really led to a whole lot of the satanic kind of things. But they sacrificed goats and animals and their own children, and did a lot of horrible things in there. So this is kind of what it looked like. This is more inside the cave. It was much bigger than, this has been thousands of years old. In here they would have had idols and things like that stuck up there to worship. This is looking at the cave. Here's some more marble pillars. And then where they would have had some type of statue or idol or something. Here's some more of the pillar tops, which I still think are beautiful. And then this is the tomb temple of the sacred goats, and it explains what that was. So this was about, 2,250 years ago, and they would take the bones of the goats that they sacrificed and put them in there because they were considered sacred. This is looking up the cliff. It was actually pretty sizable. And then this is kind of a wider shot of it. Here's some more pillars. Then from there, the valley was pretty much beautiful everywhere. A lot of farmland, a lot of bananas, a lot of olives, date palms, and lots of other things. Okay, so Israel is occupied obviously by Jewish people, but also there are a lot of Muslims there because there have been a whole lot of wars fought there over the centuries, the millennium. And so right now, to go through, you have to go through a lot of checkpoints that look like this, and there's armed guards with machine guns everywhere, and you have to be waved through and checked and whatnot because they're trying to stop terrorism, which happens, fairly regularly. So here's just looking out across some fields as well, and here's some more. Then we went back to the Sea of Galilee. This was, I believe, Capernaum, and of course I think these flowers are just beautiful. And here's a sign that proves that I'm right. Capernaum, the town of Jesus. So apparently, Jesus spent a lot of his ministry time here. That would have been from about his age 30 to 33. A lot of time would have been spent here in Capernaum. This was a fishing village, and it was actually fairly sizable. Not like a huge place, but definitely pretty. As you're looking through here, here's kind of the ancient city. This would have been like a main drag where they had marketplace things and so on and so forth. This was a synagogue, which could also be just a town place of meeting, not necessarily the temple to go worship. Here's some more of the ancient city of Capernaum, and here's some more. So obviously these would have had walls and roofs and so on and so forth. This has been thousands of years kind of abandoned. This was inside the synagogue as well, and here's some of the pillars for the synagogue. And the work they did was just really beautiful. This was Peter's house, and they built a church on top of that, like a Catholic church, but this is where Peter's house was. They're pretty sure that that's where it was, which I think is pretty interesting. So here's looking down on the Sea of Galilee. They believe that this is probably where, after Jesus rose from the dead, that the fishermen, it says that Peter, we don't know the relationship that Peter had with Jesus after, when Jesus was crucified, Peter denied him 3 times, and we don't know the relationship that they had after that, but at some point during the night, Peter's like, I'm going fishing, and so he goes fishing. He's out there all night long, and finally, Jesus comes down, he's cooking some fish, and he says, hey, throw your nets out to the other side, and they did, and they pulled up, even though they'd been fishing all night, and then they had so much that the nets were about to break, at which point Peter was like, that's my Lord, and he jumped out of the water and swam, and he came to the shore, and he's talking to Jesus, and he said, Peter, do you love me? And he asked him 3 different times. And our guide said that, there's a lot of talk about that there's eros, which is erotic love, there's philoe, I don't know how to pronounce it right, which is like brotherly love, like I love you like a brother. And then there's agape love, which is the way that God loves us. It's unconditional. So there's a lot of talk about that. But he said that I wonder if Jesus was just reestablishing a relationship and saying, look, I acknowledge that you denied me. I told you you would. Let's put that in the past. I forgive you, and let's move on. And our guide took it very seriously, and he said that must have been a huge relief for Peter. And he goes, because I know I carry around a lot of guilt, and to have Jesus just look at me in the eyes and say, I forgive you, let's move on, must have been an amazing thing and just a huge burden lifted off of him. So here's sunset at the Sea of Galilee, and another one, and another one. And then up close, these are some nuns that are out there in the Sea of Galilee. I don't know what they were doing, but I thought it was a cool picture. Okay, so then here's olive press. They have different kinds, but basically where the stone thing is, they would put the olive mash and then have something underneath it to catch all that. And then it looks like they would twist this thing and then press it down, and then that would press the olive juice out. There's different ways they do it. They'd had big rocks, big stones, boulders, whatever, that they would weigh on there, and then it would press it more and more and more. The first pass of olives oil would have been for rich people, and then the second pass would have been for less rich people, and so on and so forth, till you get kind of the stuff left over at the end. But apparently the stuff left over at the end, they use and make starter logs and stuff like that, and our guide says he uses them for his house to warm his house during the winter, and he really enjoys that a lot. Okay, so then day 5, we went to the Mount of Beatitudes, which was just gorgeous. So this is where Jesus preached that blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. Blessed are the clean of heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. I can't tell you how much this means to me. because I need mercy in my life. And to have mercy, I have to be merciful. So it's very important to me. And to not be judged, you need to not judge. Okay, so then blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. I can't wait. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the land, or inherit the earth. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. I know we need it. These are limes. There's a lime tree. I thought it was pretty. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. It doesn't necessarily say poor financially. It says poor in spirit, and that's a big difference, I think. There's a lot of people that can be poor and very prideful still. Let anyone who thirsts come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as Scripture says, rivers of living water will flow from within him. That's very true and very beautiful, inspiring. Okay, so here's a close-up of an olive tree. They have kind of this silvery green leaf that has kind of thin, not really like coniferous leaves, but still is very beautiful. And they keep them fairly short. Here's some more pictures of them. And then here's kind of what the trunk looks like. And this is right outside the River Jordan. This is the River Jordan. This is where Jesus was baptized. John the Baptist would have been baptizing people in large numbers here. And so here's the River Jordan again. Just lots of fish. There's a big catfish. And ducks and lots of wildlife around there. I thought this was pretty. I know when I was baptized, it was a life-changing event for me. Several people in our group got baptized. We had 32 people in our group. It was a really beautiful thing. I don't have pictures of it or video because I was videoing for somebody else. They had this fruit juice stand. It was delicious. Okay, so then we went to this place called Shean, and I'm going to mispronounce that pretty badly. But this was a city, and you can see here it held about 40,000 people. It had a huge wall that went around it, and then there was this hill on top. This would have been where their synagogue was. More pillars. This was looking inside of the bathhouse. So apparently they had a floor on top of this, like a marble floor on top of this, and they would have fires kind of underneath that would heat the floor, so you could have a very hot, dry room or pour water all over it, and then you'd have a very steamy room. There was kind of a place to exercise outside, and then there was different rooms. Some were for cooling off, and some were for rinsing off, and then some were for sweating, and then massages, and I'm sure you can imagine what else. Anyway, this is kind of where water came in. This little bridge thing, this little archway. This is a mikveh, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong, but basically it's kind of like a baptistry, and these were kind of pretty much everywhere. This would have been looking down kind of the main marketplace strip. You can see there's mosaic and then different layers of flooring, and then off to the left would have been a lot of shops, and then off to the right would have been the other side of the street, and they would have had some type of awning that went up over top of this so that people could have shade and go in there and shop and whatnot, like a outdoor strip mall kind of a thing. So then this town, I guess, and everywhere around there had a large earthquake at some point, and it was a measurable earthquake. All the pillars fell down in the same direction, and they all kind of shattered. But there was a very large earthquake that happened that everybody kind of knows about. So here you can see them all falling down in the same direction. Most of these pillars that are up now have been propped back up by excavators that have archaeologists and stuff like that. Here's looking down on the city, looking down from a wider view from up on the mountain. Here's up on the mountain. Here's some palm trees, which I think are gorgeous. This would have been a public bathroom, so this would have been luxurious. And they have this kind of trough where water flows underneath, and then another one where it flows there, and then they would have had leaves and stuff so you could wipe with. And then here's me demonstrating how that would have worked. You sat in between the two things, and yeah, I'm immature. Okay, so this is walking into the amphitheater, and there is the amphitheater. And here's some more pillars. It really was just massive. Okay, so then from there, this is on the Mount of Olives, and some guy had a camel that you could ride for, some shekels. So here's our guide telling us the history of Jerusalem and what happened here. And this is looking into Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives. So this in the foreground is Jewish cemetery, and then on the other side would be Muslim cemeteries. And then you can see the gold dome over there off in the distance. This is just kind of the view around. There's the gold dome. Here's looking down at the cemetery and Israeli flag and stuff. and then the sun was setting on us. So apparently people tried to desecrate the Jewish cemeteries and get in there and pee on the graves and graffiti and do horrible things. So they have to put all this broken glass on the top of the walls, and then they have barbed wire, razor wire, iron fences, and security cameras and whatnot. So I thought that was pretty interesting that they didn't want people getting in there and vandalizing, so they have to put broken glass on the concrete, which is sad. So here's coming close to the Garden of Gethsemane, and this would have been where Jesus prayed the night before he was betrayed, or sorry, the night that he was betrayed. So this was after Passover. He was praying before Judas came and brought the people to take him away, the guards to take him away. So at this point, we were pretty much as close as we could be, and our guide Stan said that he said, I don't have visions and I don't have dreams, but I at one point had a very distinct vision of Jesus right here, and as he was walking, well, not here exactly, but he was carrying his cross and walking along. He'd been beaten, he'd been whipped and flogged, crown of thorns on him, and was just exhausted. And he fell, and while he's still on the ground, he just said to himself, I cannot go on. This is too much. I cannot do this. And then it's as if he saw a face. And he said, it was my face. And then he said, I have to go on because Stan needs me. And he said, but he thought that about every one of you too. I have to go on because they need me. And so he did. It was a very touching moment. So on day 6, the first thing we did was went to the empty tomb. So obviously Jesus was crucified, and then he was laid in a tomb by a man named Joseph of Arimathea, and he had this tomb built. We don't know, dug for himself. It was very expensive. He was a very rich man. He owned vineyards. Here's a wine press that he had. And this is the actual tomb right here where people are walking in. This would have been what the stone looked like that was rolled in front of the tomb. This was inside the tomb where Jesus was laid. And then this is probably one of the most powerful things a person, I think, could ever experience, is standing in the tomb where Jesus was, and there's a sign that says, he is not here, for he is risen. And one day, so will we. Very powerful. This is my friend Barbara, as she's about to walk into the tomb. And of course, then we walk back out. Here's just kind of looking around the area. This is the empty tomb again. Here's some what I thought were pretty plants. Here's this little waterfall looking thing, which I think is gorgeous. So they had cisterns around there. Getting water really anywhere in Israel is a thing. So this, I was probably 12 feet below ground already, and then looking down this well, and then there's this kind of glass barricade, and then there's a huge ladder that goes down, and apparently this holds, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of gallons of water down here, which is pretty amazing. Okay, so we went from there to Herodium, and this was Herod's tomb. So up on top, that would have been one of Herod's palaces. He had a lot of them. And then down to the right, that would have been the amphitheater, and then off to the left, where that spiral thing is, that's where his tomb was. And they discovered that actually only 10 years ago, which is kind of interesting. This is up top where it actually is. So it looks like a hollowed out volcano, but this would have been one of Herod's many palaces. And then this is the view from up there. So as you can see everything around. It's easy to defend against enemies, and obviously very beautiful. So this is inside some of the stuff. And the amount of stone and rock work just done in this whole country is amazing to me, especially considering that they didn't have heavy machinery or anything like that. They just basically had, slaves. Okay, so we went down through this tunnel that was very steep, and we went down and down and down, and then we ended up outside, and this would have been where his tomb was, outside the mountain, and then off this direction and looking up. Anyway, Herod did some pretty amazing things, but it was also pretty much a monster. So when he died, he was not well loved, and he was afraid that nobody would mourn his death. So he gathered a bunch of the most popular rabbis in the country and gave orders that when he died, they would kill all these rabbis, because even if nobody would mourn Herod's death, they would still mourn all the rabbis, and so there would be mourning in the land when Herod died. So that was a pretty horrible thing to do, but thank God the rabbis escaped. Okay, so then we went to Bethlehem, and in my opinion, just like there was no room for Jesus in the inn, there wasn't much room for us in Bethlehem either. So this was, you might recognize this restaurant as Stars and Bucks Cafe. I guess they might be copying Starbucks, but it's hard to say. We didn't stop in there. Okay, so this church is occupied by 3 different religions, and they simultaneously have services. It's very gaudy inside. It's all under construction. It's beautiful architecture, but the lions were astronomical. So then I thought this was interesting here with the stuff pouring down. I love water features. They're difficult to do. I've done a lot of them. This was yet another cathedral somewhere. And then here's looking out at, I think, a Muslim city on the side of a hill that was built more recently. Okay, so the next day we went to Jerusalem, and this windmill is part of Jerusalem skyline, so I just took a picture of that. And then we went from there to the Holocaust Museum. So we could not take pictures inside the Holocaust Museum, but it has this, you can see this big triangle thing, and it starts you off on a path, and you go from one side to the other side, and it just leads you back down, back and forth. It starts off with a lot of hate speech, a lot of propaganda. They have board games hating on Jews, like, oh, you can tell on a Jew, and you get a hat, and if you get 4 or 5 hats, then you win the game or whatever, and you put them in prison. And then just posters and things like that that said Jews were bad. And then it went on, to where they were taking them away from their homes. And then they were like, oh, you're just going away to a work camp or something like that. But then they stole everything they had, they put them in ghettos, and then as you walk down the path, and there's all these testimonies, these video testimonies of people with all the stuff around them, the propaganda, and then their, articles and things like that. Just a huge bin of shoes and huge bin of rings and all these different things that they had. But all these testimonies, the people would be telling the stories when they were very young children, and now they're very old people, of how, the Nazis came and took one of their family members away, or their friends, or their teachers, or whatever. And there would just be tears in their eyes, and then they'd just say, and that's the last time I ever saw them. But, that wasn't the end of their story. Then they went to concentration camp, and they were there for, months or years, and somehow survived. And it was really tough to take. It was really tough to take being in there. I didn't think it was going to be as heavy as it was, but walking through there's a huge part of me that just was wanting to get out of there because of how heavy it was. So you finally make it through, and then, the Allies start to win some victories, and then eventually they win the war. And then you get close to the end, and it says, there's a thing on the wall, and there's a scripture that says, a memorial will be set up in your honor, you will not be forgotten, and what you went through, will be to your honor, or something like that. And I kind of read it just like, okay, that's nice. And I walked in this room, and I went down this kind of a bridge, and there's this big circle area. And the walls around that, there was a separation between where you stood and the walls. The walls around that were just a huge circle of like very high up in the ceiling all the way down to far below us, probably 3 stories tall, of just shelves and shelves and shelves of volumes of books that all had people's names, just one after another, just written, just one after another, the whole way through, of people that had died in the Holocaust. And these weren't just fictitious names. These were people that they verified were there before and that died in the Holocaust. And then above you looked, and there was just this huge cone of just people's pictures, just tons and tons and tons, just thousands of pictures. And when I walked in, it took my breath away. And I just, to see how many people died, from hate from that was heartbreaking. And then also to look back on that and realize that we have a lot of that hate speech today in America. And that, we hope that that doesn't lead to something like this again. All right, so then once you walk out of the Holocaust Museum, then you look at this view, and this is Jerusalem off in the distance, and then the whole world is just opened up and it's light. So it started off very dark, and it gets darker and darker and darker, and then finally there's some hope, and they win the victory, and you come out, and then there's the new world, if you will, after the Holocaust. So I thought that was very beautiful. And there were, I guess, no natural forests in Israel, and so all these trees have been planted by people that care. This is the top of that thing, so you can see it kind of splays open at the end. It's some really cool architecture. Here's another picture of it. So they had this whole kind of orchard, and these different trees have been planted in honor of people that really made a huge difference during the war, during the Holocaust. One of these trees was Corrie ten Boom, and you can look her story up. It was pretty inspiring, actually. She's got a book called The Hiding Place, and then I think a few others. So when she finally died, she had been in a concentration camp and survived, I think, all the way up until the war was won. When she died, her tree died, and so they planted a new one, and that's why it looks so small. But she was an amazing person. There's her memorial. So then this is just in the treetops, which I thought was beautiful. This is looking out over kind of the city. And then, they had a lot of landscape and architecture here at the Holocaust Museum that I thought was just beautiful and inspiring. So this metal tree is made completely out of people. And I guess there's a Jewish saying that if you save a life, you save an entire universe. And if you take a life, if you kill a life, then you kill an entire universe. And of course, when we just think about ourselves, it doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal. But a friend of mine who's not much older than me on Facebook just celebrated the fact that he had his 15th grandchild. And I thought, wow, 15 grandkids plus however many kids. And then those grandkids will have grandkids and so on and so forth. And you don't know what a huge difference that will make. And when we're good to people, like what a huge difference that will make impacting, not only the present, but the future as well. And the same conversely, if we do evil to each other, what the eventual ramifications of that are now and forever. Moving on. So then this I just thought was gorgeous. And this is all looking around. So here's a railroad car that is suspended above the side of this mountain. And I think a lot of these, a lot of the Jews were hauled away in railroad cars off to the concentration camps and then killed. And I think this probably symbolizes the fact that this is the end of the line. We're not going to let this happen again, which was pretty neat. This apparently is a memorial set up to the people whose lives were cut short, especially the children whose lives were cut short. I guess 1.5 million children were killed in the Holocaust, which is unbelievable. This guy, when all the people's parents were getting taken away, they just left the kids. Like, I don't care what happens to you, live or die, that's on you, you'll die eventually, we don't care. But they took the parents first. First they took the men and then the women and then eventually the children. So this guy stayed with the children and he taught them and he read to them and told them stories. And eventually the Nazis came to him and said, we're going to take these kids away. We'd like for you to make it easy on us. And so he took the kids and he told them stories. He said, we're going to go on a picnic. And they all followed him and didn't put up a fight and got in the train car. And the Nazis thanked him and said, okay, well, now you can go. We're going to let you free because you helped us out. And he said no. And he stayed with the kids till the bitter end. He died with the kids because he loved them. So this was set up in his honor. This says, I with upright heart freely offered all these things. And it's from Chronicles. A lot of donors gave to this. Steven Spielberg had a big thing in here. Obviously he did Schindler's List. And so I thought that was pretty special that, we're blessed immeasurably, and we should share from our abundance and do something that actually matters with our life. These were the soldiers, and they were literally everywhere, Israeli soldiers. You can't be a citizen in Israel unless you've served. Every girl has to serve 2 years, and every guy has to serve for 3 years. Okay, so then we went to the Israel Museum, which was pretty interesting. Here's a model of what Jerusalem looked like in 70 AD. So this would have been after Jesus ascended into heaven. And then this is the second temple right here. This big structure here is the second temple. And in 70 AD it was destroyed. So that's pretty interesting. That's kind of a close-up of the temple. The wall is still there, and then where the Holy of Holies is, that's kind of where that gold dome is. And then off to the left, there's a silver-looking, gray-looking dome, and that's a mosque. But they've covered over the top of this here. So here's kind of the walls of Jerusalem, which have changed to some degree, but this is what it would have looked like in 70 AD. And then here's looking out of the temple. And then here's the city itself. Obviously, the lowlands, the smaller houses would have been if you didn't have very much money. And then as you go up, then the houses get bigger and bigger, and you get more to city officials and rich people and so on. But really just amazing architecture. Under this building, we couldn't take pictures, but this is where the Dead Sea Scrolls are, or part of them anyway. And it's pretty interesting because our guide, who speaks Hebrew, obviously, he says that, when they discover the Dead Sea Scrolls, he can read them like he's reading today's Hebrew, because the language hasn't changed. English kind of changes all the time, but Hebrew apparently has been very consistent. So here's our group that we went to Israel with, 32 of us from Grace Community Church, and 32 total, and some of them were from New Mexico, but really just an amazing group of people. I really bonded with them all. Okay, so this is Jerusalem. Then they let us kind of go out to shop, which I bought a shofar and some lunch. But I took a lot of pictures because I wanted to share this with you guys so that you could see kind of what it looks like. There's pretty much cobblestone everywhere. But it really is pretty. And I never felt threatened or anything like that. People talk about all the terrorism, but there's just as much terrorism in America. Here is like a strip mall that looks like the Parks Mall, or any kind of outdoor strip mall. So let's look down here. This is the old city of David, and we went there to get some shoes so we could go to Hezekiah's tunnel the next day because we had to trudge through water. So here's the city walls, and then looking down here is kind of just down the streets. And then here's the market, and it's very tight. Apparently this was a Muslim market, and they warned me not to go in there, but everybody was very nice and jovial, and I had a great time haggling with people. I probably paid more than I should have for some shoes I'll never wear again, but it was fun. The guy said, "You have beautiful eyes." He goes, No, my friend, I am not a homo. This means if you see that there's something beautiful, then you have beautiful eyes. And I thought that was kind of interesting. He was a super nice guy, very friendly. This is looking up at the walls of Jerusalem, and you can see there's just all these layers of sedimentary rock, and then on top of that is the castle walls. So this is day 8, was in Jerusalem. Then this gray-looking dome here, that is the mosque that's up there, and then the gold dome would have been farther off to the right in the distance a little bit. So I love flowers. I think they're beautiful. Don't judge me. Here is just some, okay, so you can see they have these white tanks on top of the roofs, and the white tanks are water heaters, which pretty much everybody has, and they're somewhat solar, so the heat from the sun heats up the water. But then the black tanks, and I think you can see one or two off there in the distance, those are Muslim households, and so there's been some propaganda that the Jews might take away their water supply if there was ever a war between them, and so they always carry extra water up on their roofs just in case there's ever a war. But I've been assured that the Jews have no intention of cutting off their water supply because they're kind-hearted people. Okay, so then this is looking up at the Mount of Olives from Jerusalem, where we've been the day before. And then this is looking over the other side. This is looking down at a wall here and just looking out around. So all those glass bubbles there all have intelligent lights in them, and then from the angle that I was, there's a kind of tower of projectors, so it looks like they're going to do some video mapping here and show how the city was and then how it's progressed over the years. which is, pretty cool. I would like to see that. So we're coming down into the tunnel of Hezekiah, and here we're going down in there. This was in the wall. Jerusalem is a city that's built on a city that's built on a city that's built on a city, so it just keeps going. This would have been where David looked down on Bathsheba as she was bathing, and this would have been open sky above us, but obviously things have been built on top of each other. This is some projection mapping. The screen came down and they showed us this is the old city of David, and then there's kind of like a second run that's bigger, and then the bigger even still Jerusalem that is now. And they kind of showed us how that went, and then what you would be looking at as you looked out of this, kind of looking at the staircase up the hill, out this lighted area would have been what that was. And then here, you can't really appreciate it, but this is very deep. And so then we went down into Hezekiah's tunnel. It's very steep and very deep, but Jerusalem was the land of Canaan before that, and then the Israelites came and attacked, and the Canaanites laughed at them, and they looked down from their wall and said, "You'll never capture us, you'll never get over this wall, we'll kill you on the way up," or whatever. But then they found this waterway and kind of redirected the water to some degree and went through this waterway and then took the city, and that's when they got it. So it was very steep and very long, but then we went through about a half a mile of very narrow tunnels that had, up to thigh deep water. And then here's some people from the group, and they wanted their picture taken. So then this is finally coming out after about a half a mile, and it was dark in that tunnel, like very, very dark. If somebody had a flashlight in front of me and somebody had a flashlight behind me and I turned my light off on my phone, I couldn't see anything at all, just nothing. I could see that there was a light in the distance, but that was it. It was very dark. So I couldn't imagine, coming out from this, and, you're carrying shields and body armor and swords and spears or whatever, and then coming through this very narrow thing, and then coming out and then having to fight a battle once you get out there. But this is what it looks like coming out of the tunnel. This is what it looks back in the tunnel. And then this is coming down to the pool of Siloam. And this is where Jesus would have said, it's off to the right, where Jesus would have said, "Anyone who thirsts, let him come to me and drink. And he'll never, he'll be satisfied forever." I thought this was interesting. How often do you see a sign that says City of David this way, Western Wall, and then Pool of Siloam, just all on one sign like that? Everything was like that. You just, a stone's throw away from 10 Bible stories. Here's the City of David again. Here's David playing his harp. This is, looking up there to what is traditionally known as the upper room. Our guide assures us that this was probably not the upper room, but it is an upper room. He said the architecture is not right for that time when Jesus was there, but this would have been where they had the Last Supper, or a place like this would have been where they had their Last Supper. And Judas would have betrayed Jesus here. This is looking out of the courtyard. Also, this would have been where Pentecost probably happened, was a place similar to this, although our guide tells us that it's probably out on the steps of the temple or someplace like that, because 3,000 people were baptized that day. Okay, so then this is just looking around Jerusalem. This is one of the many gates of Jerusalem, and all these things, these divots everywhere, are bullet holes because there have been so many battles that went on here. Here's kind of another view, and as you can see, there's the military again. They were everywhere. They were very nice to us, though. They took pictures, and they were just, sweet people. Just kids, really, trying to make it. Here's looking around Jerusalem. There's these shops that were just carved into the stone. I thought that was pretty neat. Lots of palm trees and stuff. This would have been like a market area where the columns were. It would have been covered over. And then you can see the shops that would have been in there. And then they've kind of recreated, there's all these little Jewish kids running around. They were like, "No pictures, no pictures, no pictures." It was pretty cute. They were running around. They were loud and whatever, but kids are, and they were just very cute, we thought. So there's this mosaic stuff. There's more kids telling us no pictures. But they're just playing. They were having field trips. There's a lot of them. They were very cute. So this picture was to kind of show us what this marketplace would have looked like in the day. And I guess the artist had a sense of humor, because here's a close-up of a girl sharing a pomegranate, I guess, with this little kid from today's days with a baseball cap and backpack and stuff like that, just to kind of marry the old with the new, if you will. This little kid, he was way behind the rest of his class, and the teacher hadn't noticed, and he was way back there. And finally, he came straggling along, and everybody kind of said, this would have been me in school. And they're right. So I was trouble then, and I'm trouble now. Anyway, this is looking around. And then we had lunch someplace, and they had a kosher certificate. It's a pretty big deal to get a kosher certificate, and you have to be very rigorous to keep that. Here's just looking out across, down some alleyways again. More ruins. This is the Western Wall. It's also known as the Wailing Wall. And the reason why is because Napoleon Bonaparte came through whenever he was trying to conquer the world. And when he did, he came across there and he heard a very loud, just crying out. And he said, what is that? And they're like, oh, that's the Jews. And he said, what are they crying about? And they said, well, they don't have their temple anymore. And he goes, and they're all still crying this loudly about it? When did the temple get ruined? And they were like 1,800 years ago. And he goes, they have been crying for this loudly for 1,800 years. They will definitely get their temple back eventually. And so that's how it got nicknamed the Wailing Wall. This is that mosque that's right there in the same place. So this is the Muslim-owned side, and you can see it there. But the Wailing Wall, or the Western Wall, is only like 180 feet of the wall, which actually goes on for miles and miles. So here's a water fountain that's carved out of stone. I just thought that was kind of neat. This says, wherever I stand with Jerusalem. And then there's another shirt that said, civilizations, nations, and empires that have tried to destroy the Jewish people. Ancient Egypt, gone. Philistines, gone. Assyrian Empire, gone. Babylonian Empire, gone. Persian Empire, gone. Greek Empire, gone. Roman Empire, gone. Byzantine, Crusaders, Spanish Empire, Nazi Germany, Soviet Union, and it says Iran. It says the Jewish people, the smallest of all nations, but with a friend in the highest of places. And so Israel is only like 90 miles wide and like less than 400 miles tall. So it's relatively small. Well, it's very small. I think like the size of Rhode Island or something. So this is in the area of the Western Wall. You've got to go through another checkpoint and go through metal detectors and things like that, because there's a lot of violence that happens, or that could happen, I guess. And the women are on one side, and the men are on the other side over here. There's a lot of security, obviously, everywhere, but up on top of that wall is the Muslim side, and I guess when they're mad at each other, they throw rocks down from the wall, down on the people. Here's the men over here praying. The reason that they pray here is because this is pretty much as close as they can get to the temple, where the temple once stood, and hopefully one day will stand again. So they're praying. And I heard a whole lot of stories about people, even in our group. One guy was in a lot of pain, back pain and stuff, and he went there and he prayed. And he said he hadn't felt any pain since. And then another person prayed that their son's house would sell, and 2 hours later, the son contacted the mom and said, hey, by the way, my house sold 2 hours ago, or they got a contract or whatever. I thought that was pretty neat. So people write down their prayers and they stuff them in the wall. And then when the walls get too filled with the prayers, then they take them and they archive them, because they treat them as precious. That if somebody took the time to talk to God and say, hey, this is what I want, these are my requests to God, then they don't want to destroy that in any way. So they archive them, keep them safe, treat them as holy, which is pretty inspiring. This is my friend praying. In the Old Testament, it says to take these words of mine, of God's, and bind them around you, bind them on your arms, put them on your doorways, bind them around your head, and don't forget them ever. Tell your children about them, and so on and so forth. So they take this very literally, and in this box that's on this guy's arm, they have some scripture in there, and then they wrap this piece of leather around themselves, and they put one over their head and wrap that around, and then they pray, and then they undo everything and put it in a little kind of prayer cloth thing. Here's some soldiers. There's a lot of girls in the military, but they were happy to take pictures with us, and were very sweet, very helpful. They said, welcome to Israel, and we're so glad you're here, and things like that. They were just very friendly. This is Katie and her sister, Rachel, that were in our group. Super sweet people, part of Team Awesome. Go Team Awesome. So this is where the new recruits come to get sworn in to the military, and they come to the Western Wall and get sworn in. So this is a swearing-in ceremony. This little girl, there's a special hand washing ceremony that kind of goes on all the time, and they have to dump it one way and dump it the other way and rinse and rinse and rinse. And apparently that has helped them over the years through things like the Black Plague, among other things. So here's a little girl washing. She was very cute. This is under the Western Wall, and like I said, just the wall, you only see like a third of it above ground, but it goes way deep. So here was our guide underneath the wall, and he was showing us this is one stone that was like, oh gosh, 90 feet long and 10 feet tall, and I don't know how deep, that they moved one big stone like that, and then there was just huge stones like that everywhere, which was just a massive, massive thing. But this was part of the Western Wall underneath it. Here's our group trying to get through. A lot of very narrow caverns, as you can see down in here, and the architecture was, amazing. How they did all this, because all this is suspended above your head and then holding just tons and tons and tons of rock above you. But very narrow caverns, and finally, and then there was a lot of water down there as well. Here's another one of the city gates. I forget which is which. There's the Zion Gate and the I don't know what Lion Gate and so on and so forth. Here's me and my friend Brad just looking out. I think this was in the Herod's Temple, one of Herod's temples, when we were up there. And then this was getting close to day 9. There's some people on the side of the road. And day 9, we went out to the wilderness. It was absolutely beautiful. And then this, if you look close, you can see that there are some deer. They're kind of deer. I forget what they're called. Ibis or ibex, one of the two. But they're up here and they're in the trees, and you can see there's one actually in the tree, and they're just, eating and stuff. Here's a sign to Ein Gedi and the Wadi, which is like kind of like a smaller Grand Canyon, if you will. So here's Masada National Park. Masada was yet another fortress. Up in here, there's kind of a temple or whatever. So this is the snake trail that we went up, and it was about 4 miles up. 4 miles across the trail, less as the crow flies, I suppose, and then it went about a quarter of a mile up vertically. So we walked this trail. Masada means horses, and my first CD was called I Will Run with Horses, and I thought that was pretty interesting because we could have chosen to take the lift up, but instead we decided to walk. 7 of us decided to walk or run, and once I got to the top, I realized that it meant horses, and I Will Run with Horses was, like I said, the name of my first CD. There's a lot of meaning there for me, so I thought that was cool. Here's looking up the mountain, lots of caves. Here's probably about a third of the way up the mountain. I guess OJ was here back in '95. I don't know if that's legit, but I thought it was interesting. And then here's coming up, and if you can kind of get a sense of how far up this was and how high this was. Here's my friend Billy, and he walked up there with me. He's a trooper. So this is up on top, and there's just a whole village up there. You can tell there's still some structure left, synagogues and homes and marketplaces and cisterns, huge cisterns. This is kind of the view from the top up there. There's this tree I thought was pretty. I think dead trees are pretty even though they're not alive. So this is looking down into the Wadi. So the Romans came and tried to put this place under siege, and once they went under siege, there's no turning back. They're like, we are going to kill you. And so they put this place under siege for 2 straight years. But across the way, Herod redirected the water that would have just fallen off because this was kind of the dry side. It was like in the rain shadow. So not a lot of rain came over to this side. It would all fall down into the valley or whatever. But he redirected it to stop going to the edge of the valley and then to come over and gather up in cisterns so that they could have water over on this side. This would have been a stone that they kind of rounded off and they would throw on people that were coming up to attack them. Pretty brutal. This is looking down on the Masada side of the mountain and the trails and stuff that were going up the side of that. So this was a cistern, or maybe not. Yeah, it was. So that one held about 60,000 gallons. You can't really tell from the perspective, but it held about 60,000 gallons. Here's our guide, Stan, again. His last name was good enough, but I called him Stantastic because this guy really, really, really inspired me. So he starts telling the story. He's carrying around this bag of snacks all day, which I hadn't seen him carry a snack the entire time. And then all of a sudden he's telling this just beautiful story about the Valley of Dry Bones and how God is going to restore Israel and how he's going to restore us and what our part was in all that. And then he goes, oh, there they are. And all of a sudden these birds started to appear and they ate right out of his hand. And then he goes, here, you guys try some. So then we also let the birds eat out of our hand. There's a bird eating out of my hand. And here he is again. And then there he is again. But these birds were way, way up in the middle of nowhere just because, basically I think we come there. So then here's us going back to the lift. And you can kind of get an idea of how big that is. And then here's the lift coming up, which is pretty cool. This is Ein Gedi, which is another beautiful place that had a bunch of waterfalls. We didn't go all the way up because really it was my fault and I pushed to go to the Dead Sea, which I'm glad I did. But this is like an oasis basically. So these are acacia trees and they have very deep roots and they can survive with almost no water for a very long time. But if they start to die, then you know that the water's drying up and you need to move on. Or, pray for rain or whatever. So here's the Ein Gedi some more. And it was just a beautiful place. And then here's a guy that was just jogging, but of course he was jogging with his machine gun because he's in the military. And the Jews don't run away from problems, they run towards them. So if there's trouble, then they'll come and they shoot to kill. If you're gonna do some terrorism, they're not gonna hurt you or whatever, they're gonna kill you. And it's pretty clear they're gonna do that. Here's a bunch of caves that were in Ein Gedi, and one of these caves would have been where Saul was sleeping and David came and cut the corner of his cloak off, but then didn't want to kill him. And then when Saul came out of the cave, he said, look, stop following me, please. I don't want to kill you. You're God's anointed. But look, I could have killed you, but I didn't. And I feel bad for even taking this, but please stop following me and just leave me alone. I have no ill will towards you. So that was kind of neat. And a lot of other things happened here as well. Here's one of the waterfalls. And I guess there's about 9 of those that go up the mountain. But we turned around at this point and came back down. There's some more caves. There's some of these creatures. I don't know what they're called, but they look like beavers without a tail. And they were pretty neat. I saw several of them, but that's as close as I could get to one. They're shy. Here's more Ein Gedi stuff. Another acacia tree. More date palms, I think. Here's our driver. And he was just really amazing. He was a nice guy. He's... what's the word they have? Druze. And Druze is like Muslim people, kind of non-practicing Muslims with no necessarily home that happen to live in Israel that are very loyal to Israel. But he was just a really nice guy and an amazing driver. So then here was looking down on the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is 1,400 feet below sea level, and it's 9 times saltier than any ocean. It's also where they believe that Sodom and Gomorrah were. And on the south side of it, there's a huge pillar of salt that looks like a woman looking back, and they call that Lot's wife. And if you want to look up the story of Lot and his wife leaving, then it will make a whole lot more sense to you, but it's pretty neat. So this is looking into the Dead Sea. Here's these people put all the mud all over them because they believe there's, healing powers and whatnot. So kind of everybody's putting mud all over them. But you cannot sink in the Dead Sea. So, of course, I got in there and floated. And you just bob up like a cork, right? You just go right up. It's pretty neat. Of course, I went clean out to the buoys because I'm stupid. And then he said, look, if you get a mouthful of this water and swallow it, you will need medical attention. And if you get any of this in your eyes, you have to put fresh water in there because it's going to really hurt you. So take this seriously. Nothing can live in the ocean. And I was like, well, not even sharks. And he says, no. And then there's a layer, because it's below sea level that far, there's an atmospheric thing that filters out the UV rays and you can't get a sunburn down there, which I thought was pretty interesting. So I did get a splash of it in my mouth and I was like, man, that's salty. And then I got a splash of it in one of my eyes and I was like, I got to get out of here. and then I got a splash in the other eye. And then I'm trying to get out, and everybody's trying to take my picture. And I'm like, please stop. But my eyes were watering like crazy. It burned. But I cleaned it out with fresh water and took a shower and felt better. Okay, so then kind of one of the last things we did is we went up to this place, and I forget what it's called, like Bible Village or something. And these people got us, and they let us ride camels around the mountain, which was pretty neat. My camel was named Snow White. She was 30 years old, and she's the oldest camel that they have there. I'm not sure, but the story that I've made up about her is that she used to be in the mob, but she's changed her ways and has lived a humble life for the last 15 years, taking people around the mountain and inspiring them. I don't know if that's true, by the way. So here's baby camels, and they were definitely crying out to their moms for camel milk, I assume, and love. But that wasn't going to happen until we left. So here's some sheep, and then the camels are very stubborn, so they're trying to get them to move, but who can blame them for not wanting to? And then we were walking right along the side of a cliff, and this is me looking down at, like a long way down, probably a quarter of a mile down, and we're right on the edge, and this camel's just like, whatever, I got this. So then here's some more views of the camels, kind of looking around, coming around the mountain, getting closer and closer, and then here's sunset. And then finally on day 10, we flew home. And this is Billy and Leanne on the sides there, and they were our people from Grace that took us and made this whole thing possible, and were just really amazing and patient, and I couldn't thank them enough. And then Atif was our driver, and Stan was our guide, and I can't tell you what a great time I had. If you get the opportunity, I really encourage you to do it. Israel was a lot of fun.